So let me open up this message with two questions, and my request is this, that you really consider these two questions right now. And at the end of our time together today, I'm going to hit you with these same two questions again, and I'm going to challenge you then to really consider them during this week and come back for the third part of this series. So here are the questions. The first one is, if God was looking to do something extraordinary, would you want him to choose you even if you knew it was going to be difficult? The second question is, when your life comes to a close, are you going to heaven with more dreams or memories? What I mean by that, will you have more memories of what you've done, or will you be heading to heaven with more dreams of what you wished you would have done? So we're in part 2 of a series that we've titled The Last Arrow, Living a Life Without Regrets. And, you know, no one chooses to live a life of regrets, right? You don't want to go through a season or come to the sort of latter days of your life and look back and see that it's been filled with nothing but regrets. You don't go to your first job, right, and say, I'm going to royally blow this opportunity. Like, I can't wait to experience being fired, right? You don't head into a marriage and think to yourself, I'm really looking forward to regretting to the divorce, right? You don't do that. In the same way, I believe with my heart of hearts, no one wants to find themselves in the later seasons of life looking back on a life full of regrets. Now hear me, I'm not talking about mistakes, right? Because we're all going to make mistakes, absolutely. We're prone to it. It's in our nature. However, I truly believe that we can learn from our mistakes so that they don't become regrets. Regrets are when we repeat mistakes. Regrets are undone dreams. They are opportunities that we never seized. And in this series, we are using the exploits of David's mighty men as our backdrop. These are stories that are found in the Old Testament book of 1 Chronicles, chapter 11, and then they're repeated again in 2 Samuel 23. David's mighty men, right? These band of brothers that were with him even before he was crowned king. They were with him as he was being pursued by a madman by the name of King Saul. They were with him as he commanded them to battle victory after victory, right? David's mighty men, I think they can teach us from their lives about what it means to live a life without regret, because these men were on a God-driven mission. They live by principles that I fear might be becoming extinct in our culture today. Principles that they not only believed in, but they lived by. And there's a really big difference between those two. So each week in this series, we're going to drop one foundational principle into your heart, and we believe that if you pursue these principles, you can actually move from season to season in your life without looking back and having regrets. Last week, Pastor Kenny introduced us to this first principle. And he said this, I will do what is right even when the odds are against me. And if you missed last week, I would really encourage you, go back and watch that sermon online. One, just some powerful content in that sermon, but also his first 5 minutes of that sermon, when he connected remembering Martin Luther King Jr. and remembering Sanctity of Human Life Sunday, which is this Sunday, to that principle, was absolutely powerful. Don't miss that. So here's the second principle that will be a foundation of our time together today. I will go above and beyond even when no one is looking. And then I'll just give you this. This is the third one. I will not give up even when no one stands with me. See, this in series, you got to hear me, it's intended to be challenging. Last week, Kent, and I completely agree with him, he said that we believe that this series can change your life if you act on it. Because, see, there's a really big difference between agreeing with a principle and acting on it. You know, becoming lead pastor at Northway several years back, it meant that I accepted the responsibility of an immeasurable amount of burden and spiritual weight. I just got to tell you, part of that weight and burden is that I am called to do all that I can to assure that you don't live a life filled with regrets. So before I read this sort of text to you and pull it apart a little bit, there's something I want to say to all of us about this sermon. It is meant to make you be a little uncomfortable, maybe even agitate you a little bit. So that's my warning. If I could put a little warning sign up here, that's what I would do. So my wife Tina, myself, and my youngest daughter Erin, we had this wonderful plan to go to Disney the week right after Christmas, right? I mean, we were going to soak up some sun. We were going to ride some rides. We were going to check out the Christmas decorations, and we were going to spend New Year's Eve at Epcot. And over those 4 days or so, Florida experienced its coldest weather in the last 17 years. The one day, it was 40 degrees and raining sideways as we stood in the happiest place on earth. Someone said to me when I returned, they said, well, that was 50 degrees warmer than it was here. And I replied, yes, but you weren't dropping several $1,000s to have that pleasure, right? As I waited in line, the happiest place on earth, wearing 3 t-shirts and the 1 sweatshirt that I brought with me because I packed for Florida, not Kennywood, right, When you waited in lines, you saw these signs. And these signs before every single ride would warn you, about riding the ride. And they were descriptive, right? If you have high blood pressure, if you have heart, back, or neck problems, if you get motion sickness, right? If spinning makes you dizzy, which I thought was funny, if sudden stops and turns makes you anxious, they're warning you about riding this ride. For goodness sakes, whoa. The one sign said, if you're not in good health, that's an open-ended statement. I'm over 50. I wake up every morning. I don't think I'm in good health, right? It would warn you not to. It was almost like they were daring you to ride the ride with all these warnings. And at each sign, my wife Tina would say, maybe I shouldn't ride this ride. Look at that sign. And we'd have to encourage her, no, come on, you can ride this one. I said that this sermon is intended to make you uncomfortable. I gave you that warning, maybe even agitate you a little bit. But with that said, I dare you to ride this ride. Because if you do this series, you can live a life without regrets. You can shoot every last arrow at the God-designed targets that he has created specifically for you. In 1 Chronicles chapter 11, verse 15, there's this account of David's mighty men. I love this story. 3 of the 30 chief men went down to the rock to David at the cave of Adullam. And when the army of the Philistines was encamped in the valley of Rephaim, David was then in the stronghold, and the garrison of the Philistines was then at Bethlehem. And David said longingly, that someone would give me water to drink from the well of Bethlehem that is by the gate. Then the 3 mighty men broke through the camp of the Philistines, and they drew water out of the well of Bethlehem that was by the gate, and they took it and they brought it to David. But David would not drink it. He poured it out and said, far be it from me before my God that I should do this. Shall I drink the lifeblood of these men? For at the risk of their lives they brought it. Therefore he would not drink it. These things did the 3 mighty men. The one translation that I read, it says, thus were the exploits of David's mighty men. I love that, right? So before I break that down, sort of tell you what's going on maybe behind the scenes there of that story, I want to make a few strong statements to you. So here's the first one. I believe at Northway, today, across all 6 of our locations, there is more than enough spiritual power, resource, maturity, and leadership to impact the Pittsburgh region with the hope of the gospel. There's already enough here. we do not have to wait for more people in more locations. At each location today, we are doing something that we call the Small Group Connects. They're going to be happening. They're an opportunity for you that if you're currently not in a group, you can leave your location today in a small group and get in one. Some of you should be leading one. Some of you are currently in a group where there's 3 or 4 of you that can be leading one. I want to say this without maybe agitating you too much, but you have the spiritual maturity and power to do that. But for whatever reason, you have remained on the sideline. Our once a year, year-end giving opportunity comes to a close at the end of this month. 2 things. We've exceeded last year already. And right now we're at a spot where as more resources come in, we're going to be able to turn them right back out to our mission partners. It's a beautiful place to be. But I told you there was 2 things. Some of you did not participate. I am convinced, Northway, that we have all of the resources we will ever need to impact the Pittsburgh region with the hope of the gospel if those that call Northway home would become generous with the resources that God has blessed us with. We have enough resource, maturity, leadership to change our region. We have enough God-given potential in our 6 churches. But the question is will we launch arrows at the targets that God has destined for each one of us? Will we act? Will we risk? Will we sacrifice? Will we pursue God's destiny and plan for us? Or will we live with regrets? One more strong statement. Are you merely dreaming, or are you making memories? Are you going to go to heaven with a lot of undone dreams, things that you wished you would have tried? Or are you going to arrive in heaven with a backpack filled of kingdom memories, dreams that were acted on, arrows that were fired, targeted that were hit, and lives that were impacted? So I want to go through this story with you, pull it sort of apart a little bit, and challenge us with 4 sort of thoughts or 4 principles that will hopefully move you from dreaming to hitting the target and making kingdom memories. If you remember in the beginning of that text when I read it, it said 3 of the 30 chiefs, the mighty men, they arrived, right? So these 30 that they're referring to here, they are the military commanders. They might have overseen 100 or even up to 1,000 soldiers. Now remember my very first question that I asked you to start this talk together today. I said, if God was looking to do something extraordinary, would you want him to choose you even if you knew it was going to be difficult? In this story, 3 arrive. Did you notice that David didn't summon them? They chose themselves to come to David. So the first principle that I found as I studied and pulled this text apart about a bit is this. If you want God to choose you to do something extraordinary, the first thing you have to do is show up. Sometimes we want God to choose us, but we weren't in the room when he was doing his choosing because we didn't show up. I just want to be very honest. Everybody, be very honest. Don't tell the person beside you, this is just between you. Just be very honest with yourself right now. How many of you almost didn't show up today? Just a little bit fewer, just under 7,500 people showed up at Christmas Eve services at Northway. Amazing. But the following 2 weekends, under 4,000 showed up at Northway. And I know some people are saying, but Scott, man, you got to remember, it was like really cold those weekends. It was like sub-zero. Like, I know, I was standing getting sleet in the face with a sweatshirt on in Disney, right? I found, here's a little fact for you. Last Sunday was the coldest Sunday morning in Pittsburgh in 4 years. So these are things that haunt a pastor. These are little facts that they find out. Like, thank you for that. Thank you for that super cold day. But you know one thing I noticed last Sunday? The Steeler game was still sold out in that sub-zero temperature. People stood outside for 4 or 5 hours waiting for something extraordinary to happen. Unfortunately, right, it didn't. Hear me on this, though. It's not that the 27 other warrior chiefs did anything wrong by not showing up in this story. It's just that the 3 did more. They showed up. God may be waiting to expand your influence. All he needs you to do is show up. Verse 17, it said that David longingly, I love that word in there, pining, desiring, that someone would give me water to drink from the well of Bethlehem that is by the gate. Do you know what David is doing here? He's longing for a drink of water from a particular well in his hometown of Bethlehem. And folks, he's not thirsty. He's heartbroken. He's heartbroken because Bethlehem is currently occupied by a powerful and ruthless enemy, the Philistines. What he is longing for is freedom for his people. To David, that water represented God's promise. He is wishing, he's longing that God would make it possible for him and for his people to drink freely from that well again. It might have been the very well that as a shepherd boy he drew water from. That might have been the very well that he grabbed a drink from as he was headed out to pick a fight with Goliath many years ago, right? These 3 mighty men, they overhear David longing. And you know what they didn't do? They didn't respond with like, oh man, us too, David. Oh man, love to have a drink of water from that place right now, but the Philistines sort of are garrisoned there right now. Nope. They heard it, and the second principle is they stood up and they moved to the point. See, I think so often we are waiting for God to show up, and he's waiting for us to stand up. There are times to stand up and go to the front and pick a fight. Maybe you are wondering why God is not using your life for something extraordinary right now, and maybe it's because you're always standing in the back of the room. You're always blending in to the crowd. So here's what I know. If I am living my life in a realm of safety, then I have no need for God to show up in my life. If you want to see God do more in your life, then push yourself to the front line and shoot an arrow. Step into a kingdom effort and pray to God for him to meet you there. You know, one of the greatest gifts in my life was that I was mentored by a man named Wayne Alderson for over 10 years. R.C. Sproul actually wrote a book about Wayne called Stronger Than Steel. And during World War II, his platoon commander asked for volunteers to become point men or sort of advanced frontline scouts. And these men would be the ones that would be then go out ahead of their fellow soldiers at great risk, and they would survey the territory, and they would often be the ones that would take on the initial enemy fire. And Wayne stood up, raised his hand, and moved to the point. And little did he know then that his platoon later would be called upon to be the first to cross the German border. And most historians believe that Wayne and the other point man that stood up were the first 2 American soldiers to break through enemy lines and cross into Germany. See, I think too often we want God's signature on a contract that if we shoot our arrow, that we will succeed. And see, what God wants is our signature on a contract saying that we will follow him, even if we bleed. If your heart is broken over something, if there's a God-sized target that God has placed on your heart, that you've been longing to do something about, stop waiting for someone else to shoot an arrow. fire yours. What these three mighty men did was absurd. They broke through enemy lines to get water for David that he didn't even ask for, that he didn't command them to go get. And David's response, his surprise at the end of the story reveals that he might not have even been aware that they went. These men, they showed up, they stood up, and then they did the unexpected. They went from warriors to water fetchers. Could you imagine even how confusing this was to the Philistines when they heard that some of David's mighty men had broken our lines? They probably raced like to protect the king or the weapons stash. I doubt anybody said, quick, go protect the well where David, grew up. No. The mighty men, they did not see fetching water for their king as something beneath them or a menial task. Though they were not asked to serve, they served their king. And folks, when leaders begin to serve, what happens is servants will begin to lead. Be a leader, do the unexpected, and serve. The overarching principle for week 2, I mentioned it earlier, was I will go above and beyond, even when no one is looking. That's what these men did. And I believe that's the true definition of integrity and character. It's when we do what is right, even when we're not asked and even when nobody else is looking. At your work, I believe most people that get the promotions are doing not just what's expected, but they're doing the unexpected. What looks beneath you right now might be what God is calling you to do in order for him to provide you a platform later. 35 years ago, I volunteered to be an elementary Sunday school teacher, and I didn't really like elementary kids at the time, right? I did that for 7 years, and I had no idea then that would lead me here. About 5 years ago at a Wexford kids gig, our vacation Bible school, I watched the CEO of a prominent company here in Pittsburgh come each morning and be a pack leader for 5 or 6 little boys. And then he would head to the bathroom, put a suit on, and hustle to work. Shooting arrows, it often involves fetching water and serving, regardless how menial and without being asked. See, if you only do what you're asked, you're going to have regrets. No one is disqualified from serving. And I believe that God shows up when you serve without being asked. These mighty men, they showed up, they stood up, they did the unexpected, and they did the impossible. I researched this. They went 12 miles through enemy territory and brought David back water from the well in Bethlehem. Folks, followers of Jesus should do the impossible in order to show those watching that nothing is impossible with God. Before these mighty men did that, it was impossible. Yet after they did it, the entire nation of Israel then knew that the Philistines could be defeated. If you have friends and all they see you doing is the possible, then where's the proof of God in that, right? That's just the proof of you. What might happen if those around you that do not believe in God saw God do something impossible through you? Question for everybody. Is your life right now completely possible? See, I believe that God is looking for people that are done with living possible lives. I don't know what your God-given potential is or what your God-destined target is, but I believe that it should feel impossible. Otherwise, it's not big enough. When they brought the water to David, it says he would not drink it. He poured it out to the Lord. Far be it for me, he said, that I should do this. Shall I drink the lifeblood of these men? For at the risk of their lives, they brought it. David pours out the water, not as an act of disrespect to these men, but as an act of respect because of their courage, because of their bravery. He felt unworthy to even take a sip. That water that he longed for, he poured out as what is called a sacred libation offering. It's a specific offering of faith that's found throughout the entire Old Testament. David was showing how precious he considered his men who would risk their lives and how central he placed God in his life. You know, the Apostle Paul in Philippians 2, verse 14, he says this, "Do all things without grumbling or disputing, that you may be blameless and innocent, children of God without blemish in the midst of a crooked and twisted generation, among whom you shine as lights in the world. Hold fast to the word of life, so that in the day of Christ I may be proud that I did not run in vain or labor in vain." Did you hear Paul's deep sense of not wanting to regret his life in there? I don't want to run in vain. I want to shoot every arrow. I don't want to live a life of regret. And he says, even if I am poured out as a drink offering upon the sacrificial offering of your faith, I am glad, and I rejoice with you all. Likewise, you should also be glad and rejoice with me. Folks, Jesus poured himself out as a libation, as a sacrificial faith offering for us. And Paul is trying to imitate Jesus as he pours himself out, Paul was, for all those that were watching. And we are to do the same. David's mighty men would be remembered for their undying loyalty to their king. That's how I want to be remembered. A willingness to be poured out for my king. So here they come again. If God was looking to do something extraordinary, would you want him to choose you, even if it was going to be difficult? When it comes to the close of your life and you're headed to heaven, are you going to take more dreams or more memories with you? Man, if you want to take memories, you got to shoot some arrows, right? You got to show up. When there's an opportunity to stand up and move to the point, you got to take it. Don't ever think that you can't do the unexpected, because you can. If God's put it on your heart, if it's your destined target, you can do it. And then the amazing thing is that he will do the impossible through you. One of the biggest burdens on my life is to watch people regret the arrows that they never shot. I just really believe in this series, if we apply these principles, we can live a life of no regret. I'm going to ask your campus pastor at your location to step in here.